Today, we're going to talk about complaining, how it reflects upon us, how complaining robs us of our joy, how God looks at complaining, and how we can learn to stop complaining. Because in our effort to be living lives of thankfulness, I believe that complaining about our lives takes away from some of that thankfulness that we could have. Mark Twain actually says, don't complain and talk about all your problems. He says 80% of people don't care and the other 20% think you deserve them. And so I'm not going to be as harsh as Twain here, but I do agree that most people don't really want to hear our complaints. Truth be known, they have their own, right? And of course, what causes us to complain a lot of times is because we're focused on our own complaints, our own concerns and things. In fact, I'll tell you, as Christians, we are no better than anyone else in the world as far as our complaining habit. We complain just as well as anybody else. And I can tell you, I've been in the church for a long time, and even in the church, man, we complain about everything. Be it the music style, the volume of the music, the volume of the preacher. I worked in AV, so I know a little bit about that. The style of the preaching, the style of the worship. We can even complain about the carpet that's been put down in the sanctuary. Let alone, we also have those people we complain about. Sometimes we complain about even the complainers, right? So we have the same natural tendency as Christians as anybody else to complain. It seems it's sort of the human issue that we have is complaining about the way that things are going or about the way that people do us. So again, I know that, some of us all know there's complainers around us. If we're not the one, or there's somebody else, right? But I'm sure you, like me, have your own point from time to time of complaining too. But what's wrong with a little bit of complaining? I mean, it does help us get it off our chest, right? Sometimes we just have to let somebody know what upsets us. It's one of the temptations, I think, for me of Facebook and Twitter and all those, because I can type in my complaint real quick and I don't have to worry about nobody else saying anything about it. I've had to edit myself in that way throughout the years. But we like to complain. We like for somebody to hear what it is that we have to say about something that's bothering us. Some of us just go around complaining to anybody and everybody that will listen, like we're scattering seed for a crop to grow. But yet all it does is it makes us look bad. It actually robs us of our joy, I believe. When we complain, we're complaining about things and we're focusing on the wrong thing. And in that, we're not joyful people. In fact, our complaining shows us what it is we're focused on. And usually when we're complaining about something or someone, it's because something or someone has wronged us, or things didn't turn out the way that we expected or desired them to be. So our complaint revolves around us and how we feel, what expectations we had of someone or something. Excuse me. And if we look in the Bible, if we look in the Bible, there's actually 5 words for the word complain. Of course, it has a few other meanings in there. In Hebrew, there's 3 words, and in Greek, there's 2, and they can be translated to complain, murmur, bemoan, sigh, or grumble. You may not use grumble very much today, but I remember people used to talk about, somebody always grumbles all the time. He's just a grumbling kind of person. But in fact, the Greek word for complain or complainer literally means one who is discontented with his lot in life. Somebody that's unhappy with the way that their life is going about. They'd rather change their circumstances. Now, last week we talked about being content, which is the opposite of being discontented, and how that would help us live a life of thankfulness if we were more content with the things going on around us. And we talked about Paul, who said that he learned to be content as he wrote letters while he sat in prison. Now, if he was going to write a letter to do anything, you'd think he'd be writing a letter to complain because he'd been wronged. He'd been falsely imprisoned, or imprisoned for an unjust reason, let's say that. Because he was preaching Jesus. He was trying to share with people the Messiah. God should bless him, right? Because he's doing what God called him to. At least that's the way that we look at it very often, is that we should, because we follow Christ or because we follow God, then everything should work out the way that we desire it. But truth be known, it doesn't always. And Paul was in prison for preaching Jesus. And yet, instead of writing letters of complaint and telling others how bad things were for him, which I'm sure they were horrible in the prison, instead he's writing letters to encourage others. He wants to build others up instead of tear them down or bring them down with his complaints. And so he writes in Philippians 4, one of the letters that he actually wrote from prison, he writes to the people, it says, rejoice in the Lord always. And he even says it again, I say rejoice. And so imagine being in prison and writing to others to encourage them to rejoice. You see, instead of focusing on what ailed him or his circumstances, he was focused on Christ. He was focused on Jesus. And he sought to encourage others in the Lord to continue the work and ministry that they were also called to, that he was also called to himself. He wanted to be an encouragement to people. But Paul kept his joy in the Lord because he kept his focus on Jesus. See, the trouble is whenever we take our eyes off of Jesus and focus on our situation or our circumstances, it's hard for us to be content or to find joy when things aren't going our way. And then if you look at the Psalms as well, we see where David, being one of the major writers of the Psalms, where he too had lots of complaints. He complained about the world around him, about the unbelief around him, about people trying to take his kingship from him or trying to stab him in his back, his own son trying to usurp his kingdom from him. Saul, when he was king, chasing him around, trying to kill him. And even Paul also even complained about God himself. For Paul writes in Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Oh my God, I cry day by day, or cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. But with David always, though, he ends up going from his complaining into offering praise and worship as he remembers God's faithfulness throughout his journey and throughout his life. And so he always ends it with worshiping God or speaking of God's faithfulness to him, or the hope and the belief that he knew that God would come through for him once again. And so again, it's okay for you to make your complaint heard, but don't allow that complaint to overshadow your faith in God. And recognize his faithfulness to you. His salvation shall be joy enough for us if we're completely honest. And speaking of God, how does God see our complaints? How does he look at it when we're complaining about him or anything else in life? Well, Pastor Jonathan Beeler of Bethel Presbyterian Church once gave a sermon that included this line. He said, you all know that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. But do you know what he did on the 8th day? He started answering complaints. You see, God even knows that we are people that want everything in our control. But the truth is, much of our complaints in life stem from our desire to control. We want to control all things around us. And when we're not able to control them, when things don't go our way, people don't act the way that we want them to, or our situation is not the way that we desire it, then we complain because it didn't live up to our expectations. And thank God that he's a gracious and good God, that he doesn't just wipe us out for complaining all the time. But instead, he's like a good father for us. He understands that children are going to whine and cry to get their way sometimes. We're going to complain. Like little teenagers sometimes not being able to go out on Friday or Saturday night. We're going to complain because we think it's unjust the way that some things are done or the way that things didn't work out our way. But as a good father would do, he also knows when to give and when not to give what it is that we're asking for, what we're praying for, what we seek. And I believe this is why Paul was able to himself find comfort as he penned the letter to the Romans. And he says in Romans 8:28, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. All things work together for good when God's in control. It doesn't mean we're going to have the perfect, easy life, but we can trust that God has a plan and purpose through whatever it is that we are going through, and that he will see us through until the end. Yet when we're suffering or when we're fearful, we may find ourselves complaining to God like those that were rescued from Egypt in the Exodus story. See, there's where the Jews had been slaves for 400 years to the Egyptians. God brings Moses. God does 10 different plagues on the land to make them kick the Israelites out of there. They come up to the sea, can't get across it. God splits the sea for them, allows them to walk across dry ground. Then they get to the other side and they start complaining. Oh, we had it better as slaves in Egypt. We're hungry. God gives them food. He gives them bread from heaven, manna. He gives them quail in the evening. Then they complain they needed water. So then he gives them water multiple times from a rock. And they still complain time and time again. If they would have been the rescuers, they would have done it differently than God did it, I'm sure. They would have complained or did complain throughout most of the journey, questioning God from beginning to end. But God had good plan for them. He had a journey. He had a place he was going to take them to. He had a place chosen. He had a final destination. He was taking them to the promised land. And it was going to be so much better than where they had come from. Yet, they continued to whine and grumble against Moses. And Moses said, you're not grumbling against me, you're complaining against God. God even had them send spies to the promised land. As they got out to the outer edge of it, Moses sent spies to the promised land to go in and look and see if it was what God said it would be. God said it would be a land flowing with milk and honey. When they come back after 40 days in the land, guess what they told them they found? Everything was fruitful. It was a land of milk and honey. It was perfect. There was one problem though. The people there were like giants, and to them we looked like grasshoppers. There's no way we can go in and take this land. Never mind that God had told them to do so. He said he would take care of the enemies that would be before them. Only 2 men were able to actually say, we need to go take it. God's given it to us. And instead, the people allowed their fear to keep them from going in and taking the land. They complained. We'd rather go back to Egypt once again, where they were slaves. You see, instead of facing the chance to take the opportunity to be free and to live in the promised land, they didn't like where the journey was going to take them or what they had to go through. So they wanted to go back to their old lives where they were slaves, but at least they were safe there. But the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people despise me? And how long will they not believe in me in spite of all the signs that I have done among them? See, God was leading them to salvation. And instead, they didn't trust him because they didn't like the fact there were giants in the land that were fearing them or that were scaring them. They couldn't control the journey, so they'd rather not leave. They'd rather stay or go back. They didn't want to proceed further. And their complaints against God was due to their lack of faith in his promise. You see, this was a promise that was handed down from generation to generation for centuries, that God was going to give them a land to live in safely. They didn't believe him. They didn't trust his promise. Even when they had seen all the miraculous things that he had done in their life, they still did not trust him. So that generation did not make its way into the promised land. They did die in the wilderness. How about you? Are there things about your life or that you're complaining about in life that are so difficult that you won't trust God in the journey? Are you wanting to stay put or even go back because there's things that you can't control? Afraid that things are going to happen and then just complain because of them happening. Let me encourage you to focus your attention on Jesus. Trust God in the journey. Even through the valleys of sickness and death or lack of provision or comfort, trust that God has a promised land He is leading you to. You can look back over your life and see the many ways that He has worked in your life already. The things that He has brought you through that you thought were going to take you under, He's made you stronger by bringing you through them. And He knows you have to pass through these trials and these issues to get you to where He wants you to go. Again, like a good father, He didn't give you everything you asked for. He knew better. And He still knows better than give some of the things you're asking for right now. But that's where our trust comes in. That's where our faith comes in, to believing that He has something better planned for us. He has good planned for us. And you see, He wants you to be thankful for the gifts that He's already given you. And be thankful for the journey that He's leading you on today. And see, complaining keeps us from being thankful. And then nobody really likes to be around a complainer. At least I know I don't. I'd much rather spend my time with those people that are seeking joy in life and that are sharing and thankful for God's grace in their lives. Those people are uplifting to me. But when a complainer comes, man, they just bring you down. So I want to be with somebody that's going to keep me encouraged. And I want to be like Paul. I want to be an encourager no matter what it is that life hands me. I know God's grace and I trust Him. I know that He's leading me to the promised land. And I want to keep my faith in that. And then complaining, all it does is turn others off to us and to God. Who wants to follow us and the God that we serve if we're only complaining about the things that life has handed us? I'd rather make God big. I'd rather encourage others to know how great and how faithful He is. So I want to encourage us all to be known as encouragers instead of complainers. And then when we truly believe God in our situation, we will find that our complaining stops. If we believe and trust in Him and have hope in Him, then we know that He's doing good and that He's leading us where He wants us to be. He's making us and molding us into what He wants us to be. But the only way that we can do this is if we completely surrender our lives to the Creator of them. If we truly find our joy in Him and the journey that He's bringing us on, then we will stop complaining. But it takes full surrender to receive full joy. And so I encourage you as well to trust Christ. Give Him all of your life. Stop holding back from Him. If you're in a situation that you're complaining about, that you want to get out of, if your life is not going the way that you planned, give it to the one that has planned your life. Trust Him. He's asking you, He's wanting you to trust in Christ. Restore that relationship that sin broke between you and God. Stop trying to do life on your own and trust Him. Let Him lead you into the promised land by the hand of His own Son who died on the cross to pay your price into it. He's taking you on a journey. And that journey is going to be great if you give your life to Him. Doesn't mean you're not going to have your valleys and trials. But your destination, your final destination, as Paul would say, is worth it. So I pray that for you now.